And the panelists are here, and it's 9:30. Let's start. And unless there's a reason to wait. No? Okay, let's start. Let me wish you a wonderful morning, dear guests, dear panelists, dear participants, and welcome to everyone on the panel, Sven Giegold, Rasmus Andresen, and Dr. Sebastiano Sabato. For the next 1.5 hours, we would like to discuss the Green New Deal, and the question will be raised how socially just it is, and what could be done to make sure that the transformation will be just. The transformation of our economies and societies for a new age without leaving anyone behind. And that's maybe also the question to our keynote speaker. Well, how socially just is this Green New Deal, really? And so we have Dr. Sebastiano Sabato from the European Social Observatory. He's our guest, and he will give a 20-minute input. And then after that, my colleague Rasmus Andresen for spokesperson for budget policy, and also our economic and finance experts, Sven Giegold, will give their input. And then, of course, we would like to take questions and have a discussion. We will have about 50 minutes for a discussion with everyone. I'm Katrin Langensiepen, Deputy Chair of the Employment Committee on Employment and Social Affairs. So Social Europe is my topic. And I've also looked at the Green Deal, the draft that Ms. von der Leyen has put forward. And the focus is often on the topic of work, employment, the question of a minimum salary. That's not attractive to everyone. And the question is that how can we achieve a just transition to green jobs? I mean, what's important is that nobody is left behind in that transition. So how about those who really don't have a lot of money saved up, or who already live in poverty? How can we take them on board? And how can we avoid the mistakes that were made in 2008 and 2009? I mean, now it's better. There's been some investment and loans have been taken out. So that motto of always saving, saving, saving has been ditched in order. It's clear that we need more investment. You have to invest in order to have socially robust infrastructure, and also housing. The topic of housing is very, very important for people in the European Union. Can I pay for my apartment, or will I lose my apartment? And who are the people making the money in the housing sector? I think that's really Sven's topic. And then investing in social infrastructure, mobility, but also services of general interest, schools, libraries, is that locally available, a swimming pool. So is my daily life possible? Can I really participate in society? Of course, we have people who are homeless, but a transformation, a change like that cannot happen overnight, and it's going to be painful. I won't be able to transform a Polish worker in the mine to an IT expert within a year. That's going to be difficult. So it's not just about creating new jobs. That's not going to be a panacea. The Commission has put forward some documents for the proposals for the minimum salary, the Pillar of Social Rights, but it's all rather vague. Then also basic income. Some member states have it, some don't. So I think we're quite far away from a fixed structure, but social justice is really what keeps a society together, and it's dangerous to not have it. So that was my introduction, and I would like to give the floor to our guest now for the input. But please, everyone else, switch off your microphones. And if you do have questions, you can post them in the Q&A. You can see them. You can see that at the bottom where it says Q&A. You can post your questions and remarks and comments, and then afterwards I will give you the floor. So that was all from my side. Dr. Sabato, you have the word, you have the floor, and I'm looking forward to your input.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for the nice introduction, and especially thank you for inviting me to this very interesting and timely seminar. I'll share a few slides in order to structure a bit my presentation. It should be okay because actually the question is a huge one: how socially just is the Green Deal, or I would say, what is the potential of the European Green Deal in promoting a just transition, and what has been realized so far. And if the Green Deal is a good framework to combine environmental and economic objectives with social progress and social justice. I try to give a presentation in the 20 minutes I have in order also to spur a bit the discussion, but also to ask you as policymakers, as members of the European Parliament, what is actually going on, what are the perspectives, and of course I'm looking forward to the discussion with the audience. This presentation draws mostly on work we have done at the European Social Observatory with Boris Frontedu, my colleague, who is also here in the panel. And I'll first of all discuss a bit what is the social dimension of the European Green Deal, the communication of the European Commission of 2019 on the European Green Deal. So why the reference to just transition? Then I would like shortly to look at what was happened next. That is some tools for the implementation of the Green Deal and of the just transition perspective there, in particular macroeconomic governance and European semester 2020. And then there will be a short, let's say, forward-looking conclusion. That is, we know things have totally changed with the COVID-19 pandemic. So how sustainable and socially just will be the recovery? That is what's next. And here I have more questions than answers. So just to start very shortly, we know that the European Green Deal has been presented. It is a growth strategy, the new growth strategy of the European Union, aiming to transform the Union into a fair and prosperous society with a modern, resource-efficient and competitive economy. Here, the transformation should concern the society and should concern also the way in which the economy works to be more competitive, but also more environmentally sustainable. So reading this, one could think, what are the differences with the growth strategy that was before the European Green Deal? That is also Europe 2020 was meant to be a strategy for growth, but a smart, environmentally sustainable and socially inclusive growth. Indeed, in our analysis, there are quite a few differences. First of all, and important ones, first of all, for the first time, climate change and the protection of the environment are not, let's say, one of the objectives of the growth model we are heading for, one among many. But in the European Green Deal, they are meant to be the main objectives to which we should target in the future with the objective of zero net emission of greenhouse gases by 2050 and the protection, conservation of natural capital, an emphasis on the protection of biodiversity. This is different. And there is also a set in the European Green Deal of policy areas through which trying to achieve these objectives, ranging from energy, the way in which we renovate our buildings to make them more energy efficient, but also food production, transport, and so on. These are important elements, but I would also raise the attention of a difference that in our analysis there is between the European Green Deal and, for instance, Europe 2020. It's a difference that is mentioned in a way in the approach. That is, Europe 2020, the objective was, as I said, to promote smart, sustainable, and inclusive growth. And the emphasis was on the synergies that there can be between economic, social, and environmental objectives. They were meant, and they can be mutually reinforcing. That is, it was presented as a win-win solution. In the European Green Deal, there is this emphasis, but there is also more attention to the possible trade-offs between these objectives. That is, and also a certain awareness of the fact that the green transformation could have some negative consequences at the societal level. As we said, there are a lot of opportunities for job creation, but many jobs will be lost. So there is this awareness in the European Green Deal that the green transition will not be automatically social just and will not per se reduce inequalities. And in this sense, in the European Green Deal, there is a reference to the notion of just transition. That is a notion that was already used by the trade union movement in the 80s, and then the International Labour Organization issued some guidelines on just transition in 2015. In a nutshell, it concerned the need to take into account the possible uneven social implications of policies for the transition towards a more environmentally sustainable development model, and to distribute fairly costs and opportunities of these deriving from the transition, fairly between regions, between individuals, social class. And in the European Green Deal, the notion of just transition is used in, let's say, at least 4 dimensions. It's used in a way, in a political way, the awareness that the green transition cannot succeed without a broad consensus. The communication was published in December 2019. For instance, in France, there was the movement of Gilets jaunes that was mobilized in that period. And in the European Green Deal, this notion has a strong territorial and sectoral element. That is, there is an emphasis of specific support to those regions and sectors that will be affected the most by the ecological transition. It was mentioned before, for instance, regions relying on the coal industry and so on. And a strong emphasis also on the key role that education and training policies should play to prepare citizens and the workforce to provide them with the right skills for a new, greener, let's say, economy. But as we said, if it was only this, it would not really be all, in the sense that we need to put this territorial, sector, and functional focus in the framework of strong welfare systems. That is not only providing new jobs, that is important, and the skills for the new jobs, but also strong general welfare systems that provide strong minimum income benefits and employment benefits during the transition and beyond. Here in the original communication on the European Green Deal, there is indeed less emphasis. It was only mentioned that the European Pillar of Social Rights is the reference framework that should ensure this overall transformation of the welfare system, that no one is left behind. So we also tried to look at how then the Green Deal was implemented in 2020 through various instruments, because it relies on legislation, impact assessment, importantly finding. And we had a look, it's a growth strategy, how it was implemented in the European Union socio-economic governance, the European semester. And we found that there were some promising changes, trying, let's say, to put together this perspective under the umbrella notion of competitive sustainability, introducing an environmental sustainability dimension linked to the Green Deal in the semester, together with more traditional concern about productivity growth, macroeconomic stability, and social fairness with the implementation of the European Pillar of Social Rights. So in principle, the semester, at least in 2020, tried to adopt this approach, looking at, trying to look at policy coherence between social, economic, and environmental objectives, and to look at synergies and trade-off. And also there was an attempt to look at the territorial dimension of just transition, for instance, identifying specific European regions eligible for funding after the just transition fund. And such an approach was also kept in a way with the country-specific recommendations of the semester to the member states issued in May, that is after the explosion of the COVID-19 pandemic. An attempt to link a priority of investment for the green and digital transition, while at the same time addressing the socioeconomic consequences of the pandemic. So some conclusions for this analysis to be further discussed, that is that the European Green Deal has the potential, it's potentially a suitable policy framework to promote a strongest, to promote just transition. If the territorial approach that sometimes just transition has is linked to a broader reforms of the welfare states, and in particular, if it's linked to the implementation of the European Pillar of Social Rights. And a preliminary attempt to do this has been done, even though imperfect, during the semester 2020. Now, the question is what's next? Because we know that now the semester is not there anymore. We have a quite ambitious recovery plan and a quite ambitious recovery and resilience facility. Member states should present their national plans from the recovery from COVID-19 pandemic. And there are, again, let's say some elements, important elements of the European Green Deal and of just transition. Green transition as a key pillar of the recovery plans of the member states, a focus on education and skills, and let's say the request that the plans are coherent with the principles and rights of the European Pillar of Social Rights. And to conclude, in this respect, I have some questions and something that I would like to discuss, that is in the recovery and resilience facility and the national and member states recovery plans. Will a balanced approach trying to identify synergies and trade-off between economic, social, and environmental objectives be kept? How are these national plans being drafted, and how their implementation will be more monitored? Will the process be open and participatory enough to allow all institutional and societal actors to have a say? A focus on public and private investment, a huge amount of money. How much will this investment be really green and social? And especially, what will be in the future the budgetary margin for maneuver in order to invest heavily to get the green transformation at the economy and strong social protection systems? because we know that for the moment there is an openness in this, also in the recommendation of the Commission to the member states, but it's because in a way the Stability and Growth Pact has been, the general escape clause has been suspended, that gives more margins for maneuver to the member states for doing the investment needed for a just green transition. What will be next? There are already discussions about reactivating the Stability and Growth Pact. So I thank you for your attention, and I really look forward to discuss maybe a bit more into details some of the ideas and elements I tried to provide in this short speech.
Thank you, Dr. Sabato. Danke für Ihre Präsentation und ich würde einfach
Thank you
jetzt
very much for your presentation.
das Wort erteilen, dann
I would like to give the floor to Sven and then to Rasmus, and then I'm looking forward to your questions. So 3 or 4 minutes on the Green Deal. Sven, please.
The direct exchange with Sebastiano. Trade unionists normally use first names, so I hope we are all members of our union, so I will continue with Sebastiano. And thanks for your sharing. And I would actually like to stress a few things. So Greens ran on a program of a Green New Deal. Now we got a Green Deal. So the new is missing. Actually, the Green Deal is also new, but of course the new is a reference to Roosevelt's approach. And Roosevelt's approach was in many ways more stronger when it came to macroeconomic policies, when it came to regulating the financial sector and increasing the role of the state, also in order to reduce economic inequality. So therefore, my interest would be, how do you measure that difference between the Green Deal and the Green New Deal and the distributional consequences? So I heard very little how to strengthen trade unions in their negotiation power in this green transition. I'm convinced without strong trade unions, in particular in the sector where we don't have strong trade unions, are absolutely essential in order to get a just transition process. In our common member state, Germany, we have at least 25% of the workforce outside of effectively organized sectors at precarious, low wages, with high job insecurity. So, and now, of course, the danger is that more people who work so far in well-organized areas will in the future have to work under similar, more precarious conditions. So therefore, my question is, what are your demands in order to ensure that the workers which need to change, the employees which need to change their products, which has to happen because of the green transformation, will receive a negotiation power that ensures that they continue to have a just future? And second, I would like to ask how you judge the budgetary situation. I can tell you what I think. I think and I'm curious whether you share that view. I think this sentence of Ursula von der Leyen, "We will leave no one behind," is a totally empty promise. Because if I look at the figures, so 40 billion for the Just Transition Fund, this is what we spent in Germany only for the regions with lignite mining. So this is one area of the green transformation, which is really not the most difficult one. There are difficult areas in Eastern Germany, but generally it's not the most difficult area of transformation. So when we look at areas like polluting cars, parts of the chemical industry and plastics and well, I don't go through the list. The need alone for economic development and training is so much bigger. So, and I'm asking myself, and that's a bit, if I look at the European trade union movement, are you not a bit too silent? And also not in order not to be too confrontative on these issues with a view to some social democrats who basically are in the commission responsible for the respective fields, and therefore you don't speak out that loudly as one perhaps should. I say that very openly because I have that concern that we all know the Green Deal has not a strong social flank. The social pillar is not binding enough, and therefore our tone is, because we do not want to call openly these problems, because we all like, for ecological reasons, the Green Deal, and there it is strong, we are a bit shy of naming the social consequences. But I'm convinced if we get that wrong, we will pay for that later, because when we don't get the social balance right, in the end, we will not receive the ecological transformation. And therefore, if we are now too shy to name it, we will afterwards pay, not only socially, but also for a lack of green transformation. Thank you.
Herzlichen Dank, Sven. Und dann würde ich jetzt
Thank
noch
you, Sven. So Rasmus is our next speaker, and we've already had some questions to Dr. Sabato. Maybe he would like to react to that. And there are also some questions in the chat.
I'm also a member of a trade union, so I continue with the first name. I just would like to add some thoughts to the points my colleagues and you made. First of all, in more general discussion, I think one of the biggest problems, and this is also one of the reasons, I guess, why things are like Sven pointed them out, is that on European level, it's much more complicated to address the social dimension because of the missing competences when it comes to these kinds of challenges. Katrin were mentioning the debate about the minimum wage, for example, but there are others where we can see that also smaller steps already are blocked by some of the member states because we are in a fight of competences and in a debate about who should have the power when it comes to questions like that. And even states who actually are in favor of strong social rules are not in favor of giving the competences to the European Union. And this is because also they are afraid of that they are losing some of the social standards they have fought for. And this is not just a political problem, this is also a problem related to the debates in the trade unions, for example. So in general terms, this is something we also need to address, and where we, I guess, need to be better to argue for why it's a win for all if Europe will get some strong competences, and that nobody will lose this, but that everybody will win. But this is not as easy as I am pointing it out by saying that. And this is also related to some other questions. We experienced that very concrete in the negotiations for the next European budget. You and also Sven pointed out, for example, the Just Transition Fund, which actually got cut a lot by the member states. But there are other programs, like, for example, the European Health Program we voted about last week in the plenary in the European Parliament, which actually is quite good because it has the potential to go away from austerity, from the austerity measures of the past, to a more common European health approach, investing in health care in all member states, instead of seeing this as a topic where we can where we need budget cuts. So there is some change there, but also related to, for example, health. We could see the same. The Parliament fought for a strong health program, and we doubled the amount of the program, but the member states wanted to cut it. And this is something where I think we need to address it also in the broader debate. And then, of course, I would like to link it a lot to some more concrete elements where we know that we also need to change the rules. Like, for example, the fiscal rules, you pointed it out. Sven can tell a lot more about the debate on the fiscal rules and also how complicated they are. But still, right now, we are in a situation where it will be discussed again and where we also need to address that, I would say, together, and we need also to find some compromises and common solutions for this. But there are more debates, like, for example, also debate about the state aid, where we can see that also European rules sometimes, even in the opinion of many, are blocking social progress, and where we need to find some solutions for this. There, I think we really need to do our work, and we also need to be more precise, I would say, in our fights and in our projects we want to achieve. Because from my perspective, we can't wait for getting the bigger social competence for the European Union. We also need to fight for this, but we also need to find the more technical mechanisms where we maybe already can make a difference for people. And this is what we should address, and what I would like to discuss with all of you today. Thank you.
Ganz herzlichen Dank, Rasmus.
Thank you, Rasmus. Dr. Sabato. Quite a few things have been mentioned. Maybe you would like to briefly respond. And then we already have 8 questions in the chat, so I would just go through them afterwards.
Yes.
You have the floor.
Okay. Thank you, Sven and Rasmus, for your quite challenging and interesting points. To start with, I'm very sympathetic with the trade union movement, but actually I'm a researcher and not a trade unionist, so I cannot really speak on behalf of the trade union movement. But also between researchers, we usually use a first name, so it's totally fine. But nevertheless, even if I cannot speak on behalf, for sure you raised some key points. That is what I would like to highlight, that in the European Green Deal, there is the potential for, let's say, a socially just transition. But it's sure, as you said, and as I also in a way mentioned, the social aspect of this should be strengthened. And yes, there are, let's say, you have some doubts on the European Pillar of Social Rights, on the fact that it's not binding enough, but a strong link between the European Green Deal, the green and digital transition, and those rights, according to me, it could be useful. That is, even if not binding, the pillar is giving rise to a lot of initiatives from the Commission, and it can be used by actors at the national level, institutional ones, but also social partners, to advance their claims for social progress. But here, actually, my colleague Boris can discuss more about the Just Transition Fund. And you are, Sven, totally right that the initial ambition of this fund was, let's say, much, much bigger than what it was approved at the end. But here again, it's I invite you to put it in the broader context of the Recovery and Resilience Facility, where there are larger amounts. and the attempt to link that fund to other measures concerning cohesion policy and territorial development. Because it's maybe true that the overall amount of funding is not huge, but the money that will arrive from the Recovery and Resilience Facility is very significant, especially for some member states. And we should pay attention to the fact that this money acts as a catalyst to promote the needed transformation of the economy in a socially just way. And here, yes, I'm not a trade unionist, but I think that in that process of defining the national plans, and then in the implementation and in monitoring the implementation, there we should be really careful, because it's what is defining, especially in many nations, in many member states, what will be the development model of the future. And there, the trade union movement, but also civil society, should try to have a say. And unfortunately, there are no studies on this. But what in many member states is happening is exactly the contrary, that especially, let's say, in an emergency situation, these plans are being drafted by central governments alone, with no or little consultation and involvement of civil society and of the social partners. That, as we see, this puts at risk, let's say, the success of the transformation, because social consensus is needed. I stop here. Maybe Boris, before, wanted to add something specifically on the Just Transition Fund or something else.
Hi, good morning, everyone.
Gerne, bitteschön.
Yes, so I'm a colleague of Sebastiano. I'm also a researcher at the European Social Observatory, and I co-authored the paper with Sebastiano. So I'm going to add some elements, first of all, concerning the remark about Roosevelt's New Deal and the Green New Deal. So there is for me, I think a fundamental difference is that there is this objective of climate neutrality by 2050. So what does that entail? It entails that if there is to be massive public investment, they have to be compliant with this objective. Which is really difficult. So one of the approach that have been taken by the Commission is that the public investment made under the recovery and resilience plans should comply with the do no harm criterion defined in the EU taxonomy. It is difficult right now to assess this approach, because I don't know if you've seen it, I guess you did, but there were leaked documents concerning the delegated acts for the EU taxonomy, showing that they are considering to integrate in the taxonomy gas infrastructure. So, to be honest, fossil fuels, it means. I'm really curious to see if this will go through, and if it does, how they will explain that it complies with the do no harm criterion. This will be very interesting. So this is to be taken into account in the public investment. And also when you look about, for example, the European Investment Bank, you see that, for just an example, they allowed a loan to the Society Ericsson for the development of the 5G. and 25% of this loan was considered green because it enabled energy efficiency. So, yeah, green investment has a various definition according to who you're speaking to, and we'll see then through the delegated act if and to what extent it is compliant with the EU climate objectives. So that was the first thing. The second thing concerning the Just Transition Fund, indeed, the budget is really small, especially compared to what is now prepared for the engaged for the recovery. And what I would like to say is that when we see the state heads that they've been provided by the member state under the temporary framework of the Commission, it's amount at more than 2 trillion euros, and those state heads barely mention the climate objectives of the EU. So this is kind of worrying. At the same time, the ECB, which launched the Pandemic Emergency Purchase Program, this program already benefited to major fossil fuels companies such as Total, Repsol, and Eni. So all those things made me really think about this recovery plan and where will this money go, because it's not enough to put green before a word to make it really green. Thanks.
Greenwashing. Genau, ich glaube, so ein bisschen Greenwashing, grün anmalen.
Yeah, greenwashing. I guess that's what is happening here, or it seems to be happening here anyway. The word green is put everywhere, but what's behind it is not always very green. Thank you very much for your information, for your input, Boris. And I'm going to move to the Q&A now, because we've had some questions already. Monica van Palobiki's question is, can we always assume that there will be growth? Isn't there a limit at some point? Maybe we should be a bit more modest, a bit more humble when it comes to growth. Shouldn't we adopt an approach that doesn't always focus on growth? And a similar question from Christina Hasse. Wouldn't it be more achievable to just achieve stability of the economy, given the situation that we're in, the pandemic and its social consequences? Because we need a new social balance, and we can't just focus on growth. And let me have another look at the other questions. Maybe I can sum them up a little bit. There was also someone who was referring to a basic income and a question relating to the trade unions. Trade unions, of course, act in their sector, but what about those people who are not linked to trade unions or not represented to trade unions? Wouldn't a basic income be the solution here, to make sure that no one is left behind? So those are the questions here. How about a basic income, and how about growth? Do we have to limit growth? Can we always expect growth? Those are the issues here. Would anyone like to make a start? Who would like to maybe respond first? Otherwise, I would have to pass the floor to someone. Sven, Rasmus, someone else?
Well, I'm happy to say something on these evergreens, but I'm first curious what our guests will be saying about this, because many here in the room can already guess what Rasmus and myself will be saying. So first the guests, and it's also more interesting when they don't know what we think about it, to first listen to them.
Thank you, Sven.
Natürlich gerne. Sebastiano.
I saw in the questions and answer also another question with somebody asking, I referred to EU economic, macroeconomic governance and European semester, and somebody rightly asking what is European semester. That is a very, not a dumb, but a very fair question. The European semester, and it's linked also. I'm not trying to escaping from the big questions about the growth model and so on. The European semester is the system through which the European Union tries to, in a way, coordinate macroeconomic and in a way also fiscal policies and to some extent social policies of their member states. It's a project where it's a process, it was an annual process, while at the beginning the Commission identifies some priorities, then they analyze how is the situation in the member states, for instance, concerning macroeconomic elements, social elements, and so on. And at the end, the Commission issues on that basis some recommendations to the member states. It's when, for instance, we hear that the Commission said that, I don't know, Italy or Belgium should reform their pension system, or for Germany, that Germany should increase investment, reduce the surplus, and so on. That's the European semester. In a nutshell, it's so many things. I link my question, let's say, I would like to link this to the question if we can really assume that growth is the solution. The European Green Deal is a growth strategy. One of the main objectives of European economic governance and the semester is to promote growth. And not everybody agrees that growth, GDP growth should be the objective and can be sustained in the long term. I don't have a position on this. Me too, I am not an economist, but me too, I have the feeling that, let's say, an infinite path of growth is not sustainable. And somebody proposes more radical solutions based on promoting the well-being of people in other way, not only by increasing our gross domestic product. And there are solutions such as a basic income system or reducing drastically working time and so on. So there are, in a way, two different realities. The one, the world as it works now, and as it is the orientation also at the level of the European Union to promote growth in a way that hopefully it's it's more environmentally sustainable. And there are another point, more radical transformations without growth. The point is, in the political reality, how to move from one point to the other if we have to move there. The European Green Deal, I think it can be a first step because putting some environmental objectives together with economic and social one in a single process, such as the European semester, and trying year by year to assess how and if these different objectives are coherent. Maybe it's an opinion a bit naive, but in the long term might show that these objectives are not coherent and that we need to change something. Because I really don't see how right now, in this political context, a sudden transformation of, let's say, our development model could happen. So I don't have an answer of the question if we should, let's say, not aim at growth anymore as a main objective. Maybe, but as a political scientist, I can say that recent changes in the European Green Deal and some changes in 2020 in European macroeconomic governance might slowly launch a process, maybe arriving to that let's say, to that point. It's maybe a naive opinion, because things then works different. The European semester is not to just, let's say, assessing in a scientific way. This doesn't work. There are powerful interests behind the political dynamics power, but yet compared to what was before, there is some more potentiality, in my opinion.
Yes,
Herzlichen Dank. Möchten Sven, Rasmus?
Thank you very much. Sven, Rasmus, anyone on that? We also have some more questions in the chat, but yeah, first of all, Boris, please, you have the floor.
Yes, thanks. So I will first give my opinion and then have a more nuanced answer. So my opinion first is that degrowth is for me unavoidable, unavoidable. So either we organize it and we prepare for it, or the nature will impose it to us, because we are in a finite world. So yeah, we can delay it by doing deep sea mining, but then it will increase other other environmental and climate problems. So we might delay degrowth, but eventually we will have to face it. So better to be organized and prepare it when we still have time for it. So that's my opinion. Now, for a more nuanced answer, I would say that there is absolutely no consensus about the fact that growth can be decoupled from environmental damage. But the European Green Deal lays its foundation on the fact that this is possible. So what I'm feeling is that we are heading toward something that happened to economics, is that we are developing models and politics based on assumptions that have never been proven and that are sometimes proven wrong, but still we based all the reflection on those assumptions, and then we are really surprised that it didn't work the way it should in theory, but it's because those assumptions are contested and they are presented as if it was a scientific consensus, but it isn't. So that's my take on this. Moreover, about growth, so there is a lot of contradictory signals sent by the EU. So now, since the pandemic, one of the big issue has been to relocate inside the EU strategic sector for the economy, because the pandemic has shown that we really rely on third countries for really critical sector of the economy. This means that we will relocate pollution on the EU. It doesn't mean that the pollution doesn't exist. It means that when the EU is calculating its GHG emission, it doesn't take into account what is produced outside the borders. And so this is to be taken into account. And I will finish this intervention by a question that I'm asking, and you might find it funny, but I will explain then why. For example, do Colombians have to eat German and Belgian fries? It's a question. Do they have to? Because in 2019, the EU filed a complaint at the World Trade Organization because Colombia imposed duty on import for frozen fries from Germany and Belgium. This might seem anecdotic, but why am I saying this? Is because it reveals for me the art of the problem. The art of the problem is that the farmers in Germany and Belgium, they are really struggling. They are put under pressure to produce more and more. The market is over, so they have to export. Export where? Notably to countries from the global south, where the farmers are also struggling and are facing unfair competition from countries from the north. And for what? For what? What is the point of this? This kind of logic is not compatible with sustainable and social objectives of the Green Deal. So this is what I think should be debated, is really the structure of the economy. What are we looking for? And can we, on the one hand, present the Green Deal, and on the other hand, go to the WTO and ask Colombia for leaving our fries in their country? Thanks.
Herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much. Now we'll hear Sven and then Rasmus. Just looking at the time, we have a few Q&A in the chat, and I also see a hand. Well, let's hear Sven first. We just have to make sure that at 11 we close.
Issues. So first, I fully agree that for a successful Green Deal, in the end, it needs a Green New Deal. And that includes, of course, the big macroeconomic questions, and to which in today's world, more than for Roosevelt, belongs, of course, the global trade order. And the global trade order has to be changed. It has to include social and environmental standards at its core. And as a consequence, there will not be any fries from Germany or Belgium to Colombia. I don't want to go into the quality differences between German and Belgian fries. First, whether they have animal content or whether they are tasty, it's a complex and highly controversial debate. And beyond that, when it comes to basic income, I have to say, that's a long story. And in order to avoid a long quarrel with Rasmus, I will not take a strong position here now. We can have that in a separate webinar, but I would like to make one point with regard to the green transformation. I think what will happen when we get serious about climate change, a lot of people's jobs will change. Sebastiano has said it. And if you go to an industrial worker and say, look, we have a great offer for you, it's a basic income, this will not help, because no basic income can be closed in its magnitude to what we need for satisfying the needs of those who will see, say, for instance, in Germany, a well-paid union organized job in the car industry that cannot be replaced by a basic income. And also work has also paid work has very strong positive secondary effects rather than only earning money. It is also about a signal that your work is valued. And therefore, I do not believe that when we need a green transformation in 10 years to construct the bulk of it, and that's what the science says, and today's the global climate strike, that's what the next generation says. We cannot answer to this with a basic income. We have to offer satisfying, dignified work at the same time, and then leave the other debate aside. And on post-growth, I would only like to say, I personally believe again that there are, of course, limits to what the economy can and should do, not only reasons for the planet, but also because ever more is not satisfying culturally, and I think it doesn't make happy. That's also one of the common lessons which you find more or less in all big religions and philosophies. Satisfaction and happiness does not come from ever more, ever faster, and so on. Therefore, there's also cultural limits to growth. But when we need to transform our industries in the next 10 years, this will not work with the main driving logic of degrowth, because it is a logic of transformation, not a logic of doing less. If we introduce this in a logic of doing less, we will fail. It has to be a process of innovation and transforming. However, in the long run, the GDP cannot grow exponentially. But the real debate is not the size of the GDP, because the GDP is such a stupid measure. It should not be our objective to have a high GDP. Our measure should be to live well. And this is, of course, different. But how much GDP is compatible with planet and a good life, this is actually not clear to define. And therefore, I'm in favor of very tough limits, green limits, social limits. And then let's see how big GDP will be. I think it will not grow exponentially anymore, but our objective should neither be degrowth nor ever more growth. It should be good life. And therefore, the whole GDP debate is for me an obsession by those who are in favor of more and those who say the most important thing is to have less. Let's talk about the social and environmental limits and enforce them in a logic of transformation, rather than discussing this boring and bad measure GDP. It is that's my view.
Herzlichen Dank, Sven. Rasmus, bitte.
Yes, Rasmus, please. Thank you, Sven. Well, I would like to react just briefly to the basic income. There are different views. My view on it is a lot more positive than my colleague, Mr. Giegold, just said. Of course, a basic income is not the solution to all issues of transformation. I see it the same way as Sven said, that industrial workers cannot be just given a basic income and then all problems of social transformation will be dealt with. But I still do believe that the transformation is so fundamental and so massive that we will need a number of tools for various different groups with large differences, major differences between the groups. And that to me is not in opposition to the issue that we do want high quality jobs in industry as well. And to what Sven Giegold said on that, I see it the same way. But I do want to say that back to the question that we're discussing here, the Green New Deal at the European level. And to be fair, we're very far away from a European basic income with no conditions attached, much further than we are in Germany. And so at the European level, all we've achieved is discuss a few first steps. Do we need a stronger link between CO2 consumption, income from emissions trading, possible taxes that are which are being discussed, up to maybe social transfers or at least social measures? That's a discussion that's just starting, also internally with us. And as I said initially, the European Union cannot actually formulate its own politics and political measures in this area. So the Green Party is demanding this at the German national level, and it's also part of the election program of the Green Party. It's going to be of the next part of the next election program, that we want higher CO2 prices in emissions trading and pay that back to the people in the form of a basic income. I mean, even if we were to agree on this at a European level, it wouldn't even be possible feasible politically at the moment. So how can we even get to, beyond the instrument, get to a place where the EU is an actual actor which can act? I think that is a question also for the Conference of Europe. That's a process that's starting now to discuss the future of Europe and the European Union. And I think it's our job to work together with researchers and also trade unions to have this discussion. But the Greens also at the European level, I think we'll say more on this. We haven't discussed it fully. We're still internally. Thank you, Rasmus. Yes, it's a circle of discussion, really, endlessly. And I said it initially, what can we offer? I mean, I'm from Hanover, Wolfsburg, Volkswagen. I'm not talking about a Volkswagen staff member highly paid. I'm talking about those who've never even made it to the like higher level labor market for whatever reasons, those who already live in poverty. So many jobs will just be cancelled by AI, by digitalization. So what can we offer those people who are going to lose their jobs, who are losing their jobs? So, well, of course, I am in a trade unions, and good jobs are important, and fair wages. That's something that we really we have achieved a lot of progress in that as trade unionists. But how can we help people, those people who are going to probably be left behind in any sort of transformation? And we're not talking about 6 months of unemployment before they start their new job. That's not going to be the period, it's going to be much longer for them. So let's get back to a few of the questions. I'll group some of them, and then we can hear your answers. And then I'm afraid we will have run out of time. But if you have any questions that were not, which we can't answer now, then you can always get in touch per email. This should be the start of a discussion, not the end of one. Karin Frank says, what does the taxonomy of the gas infrastructure to do with social infrastructure and social justice? What is it anyways? What does it mean? And how can we have enough money at the European Union for a socially just transition? And Elke König says,
to cut the budget down. Stimmt es, dass im Rahmen der
is it true that Italy has presented a funding program to put solar panels on all the roofs in Italy? Wouldn't that be a good example to follow? I think we'll leave it at that for now. Or have I missed anything?
Da würde ich gerne wieder an das Podium geben, an unsere beiden Gäste.
There was a question about avoiding the tax dumping competition in the future. Sebastiano, could you maybe start the taxonomy of the gas infrastructure? So what is it? They didn't understand it, and how can it be used for social justice? And then also the example of Italy and their plans, and then also the topic of time. The climate change is imminent. Do we even have the time to take 10 or 15 years for this transformation? Or do we have to speed it up considerably to avoid disasters? These are many important questions to be answered for you.
But we have for sure questions to which I cannot answer. But as you said, it's a beginning of a discussion that I hope it will continue. And in particular, I'll leave the question on the taxonomy to my colleague Boris, who knows much more than me. But I would like also to come, the issue of timing is key, because as I said, with the Green Deal, the European Green Deal process has been launched. Too little, too late, maybe, but I don't see a ready, let's say, alternative and a faster one. And I would like to link these also to what Sven said before. that I agree. To which extent should we rely on GDP growth? Which level of GDP growth would be necessary? Because let's not forget that economic growth in some cases is bad for the environment in a way, but our social programs are mostly financed through redistribution of what, let's say, of the money available through economic growth. And that was my point of before, that we actually cannot know how much GDP growth would be needed. So it's the idea of putting different elements in a process, such as, for instance, the European semester of the recovery together, and to see how the different elements combine and what needs to be changed is a start. Then I don't know if it will be sufficient to promote the needed transformation at the speed is needed by the pressure of, let's say, climate change. As for Italy, I don't know exactly what's the reference. Yes, I know that, for instance, there is a huge program of the Italian government, but already started a month ago, about a 110% tax credit for, let's say, renovations of buildings, aiming at improving the energy efficiency of buildings in a significant way, for instance, increasing it by 2 classes. I think that the references to that tax credit of 100% over 5 years means that at the end you will earn the 10% of what in tax discount of what you have spent. I don't know about the results, how effective it has been, that program that I think again will continue, but also probably drawing on resources that will come from the European Recovery and Resilience Facility, where there is the so-called renovation wave objective. Let's see what happens, but even here there are various issues related to access, especially of people with low revenues to the possibility to afford initiatives to renovate their houses in an efficient way. So it's a kind of related. And very, very last point that is not on these questions. I'm not an expert on basic income as well, but you know, in many member states we have minimum income systems. They are the last safety nets that are different than basic incomes, and maybe a European action, a strong one through a directive. It's a long story to ensure that these systems that are in all the member states are adequate. Maybe it would be something to push for.
Boris, bitte. You have
Boris, please, you have the floor.
Yes, so what was exactly the question about the taxonomy? It was about the inclusion of gas,
Was
right?
das genau ist?
So
Genau.
what is it, this
Okay.
taxonomy? What does it mean? How can we use these funds to make the transformation socially just? So it was rather a question of understanding.
Okay. The EU taxonomy has been adopted as a regulation, and the objective is to classify the green activities or activities to be labeled as green, and in order to channel private and public investments towards the transition. So it makes a common classification for the EU, and then enable the investors to know exactly if they are investing in green activities. As it stands, the taxonomy is quite vague because it has to be then specified through delegated acts. So as it stands, only solid fossil fuels are excluded, and now it's up to the Commission, in collaboration with experts, to really specify the taxonomy. The taxonomy implies that to be a green investment, it should comply with the do no harm criterion, which if you want to check, I think it's the Article 17 of the regulation, if you want to see exactly what this entails. I again have maybe a critical view about the taxonomy, because yes, as I said, so now the Commission is drafting the delegated acts, and a leaked document suggests that gas infrastructure may be considered as a transition activity, which I think opens the door to a lot more worrying greenwashing. And also I want to say that so to guide the Commission, to help the Commission through this sustainable financing approach, it is a BlackRock management, so the world's largest asset manager that have been appointed to help the Commission to define its approach in sustainable finance. And BlackRock management has been really doing strong lobbying to make this taxonomy as vague as it could be. So it gives you an idea of what we are now, of where we are now. Thanks.
Herzlichen Dank.
Thank you.
Sven, Rasmus, wollt ihr dazu was sagen? Gerne. Sven?
Fang ruhig an, Sven.
Gerne der Kollege Andresen zuerst, aber sonst...
I'm happy to leave the floor to Rasmus, but I'm also happy to say something myself with regards to taxes. Well, first of all, I agree that the taxonomy, of course, will have social consequences. But I think that's something kind of happening on the margins. This is mainly about investing in areas that are not sustainable. And these are wrong investments, which we will then be lacking in other areas and which will in turn have other social consequences. But this kind of happens on a secondary level. The first primary level of effects is that existing investments are devalued at a very high speed. And the major question here is, how do we come up with alternatives? New types of investments for the same regions, for the same kind of labor, and do these alternatives, or are they generated in Europe or somewhere else? Because in recent years, we haven't really had a very good record when it came to investing in the future or creating sectors for the future. So I'd like to say something which isn't very popular among green politicians. Whether and how social is the Green Deal? Well, that's a question which is also down to the competitiveness of our EU economy, because if we don't address our competitiveness issues, then I think we will have even more dramatic social consequences. On the other hand, it's also wrong to just put all your eggs in the competitiveness basket, and with that, all social issues will magically disappear. That will not happen either, because these two are interlinked, and they cannot be seen as a trade-off. Secondly, with regards to taxes, well, taxes is a topic that I've been dealing with for a long time. I always say, well, Katrin, you are then allowed to spend the money that I get in with our fiscal policy. And our politics is based on a principle of taxes, but if we keep concentrating our economy on monopolies and not so much on decentralized smaller companies. So if we don't focus our tax systems on these large monopolies, on these global networks, then we will have to pay the price in the end, because we will not have the money to create future-oriented investments. We need taxes from these big players. And so it is a central element to apply a minimum tax in Europe, to come up with a digital tax in Europe, because there is a lot of competition from the digital area and towards the traditional companies, so that they should pay for it as well. And well, especially in Germany, the conservatives are blocking that kind of EU common tax policy. But we need this common tax policy for social reasons as well. We need to unblock this veto. In the European Parliament, the Social Democrats, for example, are very much in favor of a common policy. But in Germany, well, our Minister Scholz, for example, he says the right things, but then he keeps blocking things anyway. And we're not going to get ahead with that approach, because we need fair taxes. Otherwise, we won't have a fair social system. And we need that income. Otherwise, we won't have a sustainable, socially oriented output and investment. So, and to achieve that, we need common European tax policy. I think we have made some progress in some areas, but when it comes to dealing with these large companies, I think there's still some road ahead of us. And I'd like to pass the floor to Rasmus here, because he wants to centralize that on a European level. Let's hear what he has to say. Yes, thank you very much. I do have to look at the time, though. We really have to close at 11 on the dot. So, yeah, I'll just have to point out that you keep it short, please, Rasmus. And you can also sum up if you'd like to. And at this point, I would like to thank everyone for taking part here, especially Sebastiano and Boris, for your input and statements. Thank you for any questions, and you can contact us, as I said, if there are any open questions. So the remaining 6 minutes go to Rasmus now. Thank you very much, Rasmus. Thank you very much, Katrin, Sven, Sebastiano, and Boris. This was a very interesting panel, and the questions were also very helpful. I think we weren't able to answer all of them satisfactorily. That's not the goal of this kind of webinar anyway. It's more to create a focus on social issues, on the issues at hand, to get some input, to think about the Green Deal. What does it look like now? Where does it need adjustment or change? Because then we will be able to take that back with us into our jobs and our positions in the European Parliament or in other areas. And that's what we can also look at, all these questions that were asked in the Q&A. So before I sum up, I would like to react to one question which concerned budget cuts, and also something that I said at the beginning. I said that some member states, when it came to negotiating the budget, they or most member states limited social expenditure when it came to negotiating the budget. Of course, there are political reasons for that, but the main argument was always competitiveness and also whose competence is this? The German government, for example, always said to us, yeah, of course, health policy is a very important topic and it would be good if the EU would act a bit more in that respect, but it's not the competence of the EU. And that's an argument that is always being put forward. But if we want to, this is possible. We have the EU for Health program, for example, which we really fought for. And there's also a group of member states on the European level who are simply not interested in further development of the European financial and budgetary policy and who just want to veto everything. Netherlands, Finland, Sweden, Austria, in part Germany as well, and others. We'll have to see where this goes. It also depends on the federal elections in Germany, for example. And I think our general elections in Germany should also be an opportunity to take stock on our actions on a European level and to maybe reorient our politics after these elections. That's something that's very important to me. The topics that are being dealt with on a European level should be brought back to federal elections and they should be addressed when you discuss with candidates, because it's important to hear their answers. And well, we need a social update of our rules, the rules of the game for the European Union when it comes to fiscal policy, when it comes to climate politics, when it comes to budget planning. The social dimension has to be more of a focus in all these fields. We did manage to integrate climate and biodiversity goals into the budget negotiations. And that's very important, not just simply because we have to act for our climate, but also because that will lead to structural change and a change of focus. And budgetary policy shouldn't just be about debt or decreasing debt and so on. It should also be about climate aspects, environmental aspects, climate goals, etc. So when it comes to designing this type of policy, we should really change our focus. And I'm looking forward to discuss these topics in the following months as well. Another point I would like to mention is how we can integrate the social partners into our recovery and resilience fund. There are several programs that are being elaborated in the member states. There are funds available for recovery and the member states can spend these funds. It is good to have that kind of money, but when we look at what is happening in the member states, for example, in Germany, well, I think social partners and also the climate movement should be a lot more involved. And I hope that our German government will turn towards us. We will certainly keep on pressurizing them. So thank you very much for the webinar. And I think it won't be the last time we will talk about these issues. Thank you. Well, thank you. We will close now, very much on time, and hopefully see you soon again. Have a great day and a nice weekend. Bye-bye.
So we'll now have a short moving period where we change from one webinar to the other. So just bear with me and we'll continue in a few minutes.
Ich verlasse den Raum.
So, wir sind jetzt live auf YouTube.
Haben wir denn schon Ska bei uns? Ich sehe sie noch nicht.
Ich bin schon
Is
länger da.
Scar here? Yes, I'm here. I just hadn't seen you. Hello, welcome.
Ja, dann beginnen wir doch diese
Let's start with this final, this closing part of the webinar. I mean, it's really difficult to summarize several webinars. Oh, okay, I have been asked to wait one more minute to give more people the opportunity to connect.
Okay, um 11:05 Uhr beginnen wir.
So we're going to start at 11:05.
Ja, also herzlich willkommen. Gerne
Welcome.
auch wieder mit meiner Kollegin Ska im Bild. Fraktionsvorsitzende
And now I hope we can also see my colleague Ska Keller. She's also the head of our group together with Philip Lambert. They were also the leading candidates for the Greens, the German elections, and Ska also for the European level. And the Green Deal that which we have been discussing now to draw an interim balance is really the result, a direct product of the European elections. So the time has come to see what have we achieved, what has become of this baby, so to speak. And today we have more demonstrations in terms of climate, and the Green Deal is also a consequence of green successes in the European elections. And after we wanted a Green New Deal with ambitious goals for climate protection, also social and economic changes, we received this of Ursula von der Leyen, and we had not expected that, and also the Green Deal. And so today we've looked at various different aspects of it. Of course, it's impossible to summarize many hours of webinars, especially if it's still impossible to participate in several different events in parallel. And despite all technical progress, that is something that we still haven't quite managed. So I'm going to do my very best, also on the basis of the notes that I have received for the other webinars. It's just going to be just as difficult for Ska, of course, and I am looking forward to hear how she will master this challenge and what she sees as the consequences for the work of our group. So let me start by saying the following. The Green Deal ecologically is a step in the right direction. Our ministers have demonstrated that from the various member states, and that's also what we've heard from various associations, environmental associations and experts. So hardly anyone has said that it's not a good project and it's not credible. So that's not that wasn't the feedback. So in terms of the climate and ecology, the ambitions are going in the right direction. There's just many other issues. And for instance, the question, how coherently has this been implemented, or is this being implemented? And the central question for us in Germany is the phasing out of coal mining. So without doing that, if we're going to wait until 2038, then that is not credible in terms of the implementation of the Green Deal. And so we do need credible exit strategies for coal mining. And then secondly, the ambition being minus 55% minimum, that's what the federal government and also the council want. That's not going to be enough to get only 1.5 degree heating, and the parliament is asking for more, and we're also going to ask for higher ambition for Germany today, and we're going to stick with that. And that means that within the sectors we need to implement several different activities. And several webinars have also mentioned the fact that it's questionable to say that to see where we're building our bridges in order to go in the right direction ecologically. Fossil gas is not a bridge technology. It's a mistake for infrastructure. We do not need more gas infrastructure, more gas power plants. And especially not if they're going to be declared as sustainable or green finance and investments. So gas infrastructure, especially in richer member states, can be replaced. And if you're using gas to replace coal in the short term, you can't call that sustainable investment. So this is really a discussion that has to be that we have to pilot in terms of climate protection. And then also, of course, the combination of various different sectors in climate protection is very central, but also Professor Felix Eckert and the social webinar has come back again and again saying that the economic model also matters. So ever more growth, ever more GDP growth. So without ever saying this is enough, whether that is the right model. So in the short term, the Green Deal is a transformation project with innovative new jobs, coming with innovative new jobs, but at the same time, endless economic growth isn't compatible with the objectives of the Green Deal. And as Greens, we also have to talk about this question. The EU Commission has framed the Green Deal as a strategy for growth. Of course, that is understandable because it helped them to overcome some resistance, but long term, it's not compatible with our ecological ambitions. You can also see that in the natural areas, in the natural habitats. So the Green Deal has achieved important objectives objectives in biodiversity. Also, the farm to fork strategy is a positive approach. But at the same time, there's still this more or less blind implementation of the CAP, the Common Agricultural Policy, and subsidies in that area. So we cannot relent. We have to continue at the European and at the German level to say we clearly need social and ecological objectives guiding the implementation, and use every room for maneuver, especially in agricultural policy, to come to a different line of action. Europe needs a credible forestry strategy as well. So forestry management and ecosystem that are really as natural as possible in order to foster climate protection. So also in the webinars, we had a strong discussion about the international aspects of this topic, and also in terms of the public perception that seems to be often forgotten. So the border balancing mechanism is something that people often mention because other third countries may not implement the same ambitious climate protection goals and policies. That's correct. But the Green Deal and international climate policy will fail if we can't find a way to cooperate with the other important economic areas internationally. So that means if we have such a balancing mechanism for imports, then that is evident of failure. We need a cooperative strategy to make the Green Deal a more international project. And it's happening. There is work ongoing, but Europe can really do a lot more on that. And so in the international webinar, during the international webinar, it was clearly said that we have to have a forward-looking discussion with the respective countries and help those countries with their transformation, which are going to be affected negatively by strong climate protection policies. And in some regions, we have technological dependencies, resource dependencies, and you don't want to replace these old dependencies with new ones, but you want to really produce a lot in Europe and in the neighboring areas for these new technologies, and also help setting international standards and make sure that we have strong product standards and international standards that Europe helps to shape, which Europe helps to shape. That is a very important issue, and that's going to be decisive for the Green Deal either being a success or not, and also in economic terms for Europe, a success. So as far as the social aspects, I would like to say the following. So far, the promises for implementation that Ursula von der Leyen made, so nobody will be left behind, hasn't been accompanied by actual measures. Of course, it's great that money is being given by governments for regions to start a green transformation. So, but we also have the news of negative regional consequences of the Green Deal. But it has also been said that climate protection, which we only do if nobody's going to come any harm doing it, such activities or such yardstick for measures will not be successful. So for those who are living in regions or working in sectors that will be negatively affected by climate protection should be the first to get an opportunity in new sectors that we will have. So of course, it will be painful for some, otherwise it can't be successful, but we can make sure that we have measures to balance this for social justice. And now in this pandemic time, investing together is not going to be enough. This transformation process will take 10 or 20 years and will take speed over 10 or 20 years. So that means that this European investment in order to achieve social justice has to be more permanent funding. The recovery fund cannot remain an individual thing just because of this exceptional situation. And CDU, our German parties, and also the Liberals and the European Parliament want this to be a one-off. But we're going to continue to need it because otherwise we're not going to have the support in the broad public for the Green Deal in the long term. So this is what I heard and said. So I am going to give the floor to Ska now. Thank you, Sven, and thanks everyone who has spoken and who made sure that we can continue. Well, I would also agree. The Green Deal in principle is good, especially if you compare it to what we have seen before from the Commission in terms of ambition, ecological ambition. So that's really changed with the Green Deal now. So that's definitely progress. Ecological transition is now not a strange term that nobody's ever heard of in Brussels, and that is really positive. But at the same time, as you said, the devil's in the detail. So how seriously can we take this ambition or these goals if major parts of European policies are not touched, for instance, agricultural policy. So we're still in the last stage of negotiating which direction agricultural policy will take, and it's not looking good at all. As the Greens, we're quite alone at the moment. We're probably not going to manage that these funds are going to spend in order to foster animal welfare and ecological standards. It's going to be linked to area. It's going to continue to be linked to area. And I mean, the Green Deal doesn't change anything. I mean, there's a pretty paper called Farm to Fork, which looks a lot more green, but it's just really just a sheet of paper, and it has not had any actual effect on the member states' position and the majorities in the European Parliament. That's also part of the sad truth. I mean, of course, when they speak on a Sunday, they often sound quite positive and green, but that's not how many people vote in the parliament. And then, of course, the social dimension. We also have had a panel where this global dimension of the climate crisis was really mentioned, and the global dimension of the climate crisis, and trade is a major part of that. So when we trade with the world, then that has economic but also ecological effects. So a great example is Mercosur, where we should have had a trade agreement, but also, among other things, Brazil, and where the rainforest is cut down at massive rates. That's a problem for the entire world, and also for those people who really live on the forest and off the forest, indigenous groups who are not involved at all. And the European Union really has to ask itself and the member states, why have a trade agreement with Mercosur when that's just going to make them cut down those trees even faster, and it's not going to help at all with the climate crisis. So that's a massive problem.
Well, and when it comes to other suggestions of the European Union, there is some progress, mostly in all cases, but it's not enough. So we do move ahead, but we kind of, well, troll along, and we don't really make big progress. And that's not something that is enough. when it comes to climate change, because climate change is a lot faster, a lot more drastic than the progress we make. And we have huge environmental catastrophes, and we react to them by saying, well, we should do a little more. And that's not enough, quite simply. And when it comes to a compromise, of course, we will have to see how we deal with it, how we find a balance, how we come to an agreement. But that's politics, and we'll have to find a solution. So it's good that we have this climate aspect now, this climate focus, but it's still not broad enough. So we still, as Greens in the European Parliament, have to make sure that we become more progressive, that we have majorities to put pressure on legislation and on the member states who make or suggest that legislation. And I hope we will come to these majorities through the year, and hopefully we will be able to achieve more. So Green Deal is a good approach. It's a good start, but we will have to take more action, and we will have to put more pressure on all relevant actors and stakeholders to make sure that real change will happen, that real improvement will happen. And political majorities need to see also that citizens and the grassroots movements really are putting pressure on them, that they are players, and that they should not just be driven by the automotive industry, for example. Back to you, Sven. Thank you. I'm just going to have a look at the Q&A and other feedback, if there is anything we should maybe address, but I would also like to thank everyone who have been involved in these webinars, our members of the delegation offices. I don't know if there is anyone on YouTube there, if there are comments or feedback from people who took part in this series of webinars. But if there is no input from there, I would like to thank everyone, all members of parliament, their teams, our team members in our delegation's office who did all the work in the background and behind the scenes. So thank you. And I'm sure that the Green Deal will be a topic for a long time. It will also be a big part in our green program for the federal elections in Germany, and this will also be something that will influence the future creation or adaptation of the Green Deal. I hope we will finally have a government which moves green aspects and climate aspects forward and doesn't always step on the brakes. So let's see what happens in autumn, and let's work for that until autumn. All the best to you all. Thank you for being here. Hope you have a lovely weekend and have the sun shining on you just like I do.